Giddy up, everybody. Steve the Amateur Historian. I'm traveling back up into the northwest sector of the Portland area. I'm heading dead ahead for Forest Park, which borders along the West Hills on the east side of the hills. Lots of cool trails, lots of cool places to walk. But the reason I'm going up there is for a slightly seedier, sketchy, just downright more depressing reason. Now arriving at Lower Maclay Park. This is just, one of the many entry points to Forest Park, which is just big. It just spans all across and up there. Just about to talk about how much I love this park. I'm not loving the mud. But yeah, I used to come to this park all the time, cross-country practices. It's really fun walking that way, but be warned, it does become very hilly very quick. I'm just gonna settle myself right over here because the story I have to tell is a little bit grisly. And I know people like to come through here to have a good time. Now, the reason I'm here in Forest Park today is to discuss a certain individual. Now, one of my most favorite movies to come out in the past 2 years is a movie called Eddie the Eagle. Maybe you've heard of it. Hugh Jackman, the guy from The Kingsman, can't remember his name. Ultimate feel-good movie. Well, the character that's based on, the real guy, his name was Eddie Edwards. Obviously, his biological name was Edward Edwards. And just kind of a nice, happy-go-lucky dude. Well, today I'm going to bring you a story about another Edward Edwards who was polar opposite.
Number one, what is your name, please?
My name is Ed Edwards.
Number two.
My name is Ed Edwards.
Number three.
My name is Ed Edwards.
And here is the extraordinary story of Ed Edwards.
This guy has been described by many as the serial killer nobody knows. And he's been accused of committing almost every major crime, serial killer, rampage killing style that there is. He's been accused of being the guy that killed Sam Shepard's wife back in the 50s. He's been accused of the guy that killed Martha Moxley in 1975. He's been accused of being the Zodiac killer. Any famous crime, and he's been accused of it by someone. And what's really interesting, if you've seen the Making a Murderer series on Netflix, even if you haven't, everybody's talking about it. People think this Edward Edwards guy may have been the guy that killed the woman that Stephen Avery, the guy the documentary's focused on, is in prison now for killing. And there's lots of theories, like this guy planned everything out to a T, and there always had to be some connection to other killings at some point. Like, he's believed to have killed Martha Moxley, who was killed on Halloween 1975. The woman that Stephen Avery is accused of killing died Halloween, I believe, 2005. So there's that interesting connection. He's been accused of being the Zodiac killer. The primary newspaper investigator who was investigating the Zodiac killer was named Paul Avery. And then you fast forward ahead, almost 40 years, you've got the Making a Murder situation, and the guy that has taken the fall, because I don't believe he did it, was named Stephen Avery. And Edwards is like a legitimate killer. He's not just some guy that someone's just he's been just a poster child. You don't know who did that? Well, this Edward Edwards guy did it. He legitimately did kill multiple people in Wisconsin. He was in Wisconsin near where Stephen Avery supposedly killed this woman at the time it happened. So, these stories are also wild, but they're not completely without basis, and Edwards lived in the San Francisco area at the time when the Zodiac murders happened. I honestly don't know. I know more about the crimes that he's been accused of than who he really was as a person. Apparently, standard backstory, had a terrible upbringing, He was apparently brought up in an orphanage where he was, beaten by nuns, treated horribly by the clergy. And because of that, he kind of developed this almost occult, satanic type vibe around him. And that's why people claim that he committed these murders that happen on holidays. Again, there's at least 2 that he's been accused of that happened on Halloween. And I apologize for the sniffle. I've been trying to get over a bug for a week. Just bear with me. So there's just so much on this guy, and he finally got busted in 2009. He was like 75 years old. He finally got busted for some crimes he committed, I believe, in Wisconsin, murders he did in Wisconsin, only a couple years apart from the Stephen Avery case. He's admitted to others, and unfortunately, we're not really going to know much more about his story, probably because he passed away a few years ago at the ripe old age of 77. Now, what does this have to do with Forest Park? Well, there was a famous case in 1960. There was a young couple named Larry Payton and, I can't remember the woman's, Beverly Allen. I almost lost it. That would just ruin the whole video. Larry Payton and Beverly Allen. They were a young couple, and they had actually driven to a point, a private spot along Forest Park. It was on the other end, so it's a little bit further down and over in a space that is now private property. You can't get there, hence I'm not even going to try to get to the spot. And so they parked their car over there. I believe it was in August of 60. I could be wrong about the month. And they never came home that night. A day later, a police officer found Payton in his car, stabbed to death, 23 stab wounds. And it was, I think, almost a month before Beverly Allen's body was discovered. She'd been removed from the car, beaten, bludgeoned, mutilated, and her body was just left in a ditch near the Sunset Highway, which is, 5 miles that way. So, a lot of people think that whoever did that killing may have been the Zodiac Killer. Now, it was quite a few years before he started killing regularly. And it was up in the Portland area, but, serial killers do have a tendency to move around. And what makes people think it was maybe the Zodiac is, one, it fit his MO so well. He attacked an unsuspecting couple while they were in a parked car in a secluded spot. 6 of the Zodiac's 7 victims fit that bill. So there's a correlation there. And there's also this theory that the Zodiac Killer put more attention into killing his female victims than his male victims. In 2 of his attacks, where he attacked couples, he attacked Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mougeot at a place called, I believe, Blue Rock Springs. She died, but he survived. And then later, he went to Lake Berryessa, which is kind of a little ways removed from the city, where a former couple, they weren't a couple at that point, but Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard. Interestingly enough, Brian Hartnell is from Troutdale. I learned that at random. They were sitting by the lake. He, the Zodiac, showed up, stabbed them both to death. Brian survived, Cecilia didn't. So there seems to be this notion that the Zodiac, put a lot more time into taking out his female victims than his male victims. So there's an interesting correlation here when you think about the fact that Larry Payton was just stabbed and left in the car. But Beverly Allen's body, she was probably killed there on the spot, but she was removed and much more brutally mutilated and left somewhere else. So there's kind of that notion to it, and it's very interesting. I'm not convinced he's the Zodiac, because the reason Edward Edwards plays into this whole thing is one of the aspects of his MO, his modus operandi, the way he did things, was he would always return to the crime scene. There were so many crimes that he committed where he literally went back to the spot. And it's known that he, for some reason, just happened to be fiddling around at the crime scene right after Larry Payton and Miss Allen were murdered. He just happened to be on the scene. He just happened to be in Portland at the time. And he got busted a few days later on an unrelated charge. And then he broke out of jail, and really no effort was made to chase him. The authorities never took him seriously as a suspect. Even though now in all likelihood it was him. Whether he's a Zodiac killer or anybody else in the world, it's more than likely that Edward Edwards was the guy that, on the other end of Forest Park here, murdered this young couple in their car back in 1960. They ended up busting a couple of teenage kids for it. One of them got off. I think the other two got paroled. Even to this day, that seemed like a frame-up. Nobody really believes that these guys did it. You know, the only thing they really had to go on was they were out partying and getting a little crazy, and that one of them had like an altercation with Peyton at another date. So, oh, they must have gone out there and killed him. And so it's very interesting. And, you know, there's another theory out there, and this one actually kind of interests me, because I honestly think this one's got as much credence as any, and that is the idea that Edward Edwards is maybe D.B. Cooper. Now, if you don't know the story of D.B. Cooper hijacked an airplane that took off from Portland International Airport, ways off that way, back in, I want to say 1977. I know it was the late 70s, don't hold me to that, it was the late 70s. 77, 78, he hijacked an airplane, and he was known as kind of like the gentleman hijacker. Like, he told one of the stewardesses, like, I have a bomb, you know, just do as I say and we'll be fine. And as they were, you know, obeying his requests, he was sitting back, chuckling, having a few drinks, hanging out. But if you look at pictures of Edward Edwards, and then you look at the most famous artist rendition of D.B. Cooper, there's a lot of similarities. The hair is very similar. To me, more than anything, is they're kind of small, kind of, if you can put it that way. Their mouths are identical. Again, I'm not saying that just because they share a lot of physical characteristics that Edward Edwards was D.B. Cooper, but the fact that they look alike, the fact that Edward Edwards would have been right about the same age as D.B. Cooper at the time that this hijacking happened, leads me to think, hey, you know, of all the crazy theories flying around, you know, right now regarding this guy, the idea that he was D.B. Cooper to me has as much credence as anything else in the world. He didn't even need to be a sophisticated criminal, you know, and that was one of the things about Edward Edwards. Anything you hear about the guy, he supposedly committed crimes for the attention, for the grandeur, and that's why he supposedly committed all these big astronomical cases, because they got attention. And D.B. Cooper's case certainly got attention. And, you know, he was able to leap out of the plane with a parachute with his money, and no one's seen him since. Some people think he died. I mean, maybe. I don't see why he necessarily would have, but as it stands today, there's all kinds of theories about who he was, but nobody knows for certain. So, maybe it was Edward Edwards. I don't know. But yeah, it all happened right on the other end of this huge, beautiful park that people love to come and run around in. So I just want to bring you guys out here, and since I couldn't take you to the spot, I just wanted to set up my camera here and just riff to you guys and tell you about this crazy guy, because, you know, anybody who knows about Edward Edwards and all that stuff, they think more about the sophisticated crimes that happen elsewhere. They don't really think about him being in Portland because he really wasn't here that long. So, you know, if you think about this guy, this unknown entity, the serial killer that nobody knows, people don't even really think much about, you know, Portland being an aspect of that history, and yet there was a crime, a double murder that happened right here that he, you know, as likely as anybody else, was the perpetrator of. And then maybe he was also D.B. Cooper, another famous unknown Portland-related crime. So I just thought that was really cool when I found out about it. I knew I had to do a video about that. But all that said, that's it, my fellow adventurers. So all that said, you know the shtick. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. I can't emphasize that enough, you guys. And hit up our Patreon page. I'm running that with my buddy Nick, the local Pathfinder, to help fund more and more extravagant, you know, treks, so we can bring to you more awesome content and not just me in Portland. And all that said, this has been Steve the Amateur Historian. See you guys next time.